cool achievement. And that is our ultimate destination, our definition of financial certainty. If you've heard me talk at all about the notion of financial certainty, you've heard me say over and over again that our definitions of wealth are inherently personal, meaning that what you want is unique to you, and therefore your definition of wealth is different than others. I have some clients who want multiple houses and cars and all kinds of stuff, and that's their version of wealth. And I have other folks who are like, I want to live a minimalist, stoic lifestyle, and that's their definition of wealth. So it all varies, and it depends. That's what makes things so challenging when you ask somebody a question about what you should do. Well, inherently should is an anxiety-producing statement. It's one of those 10 cognitive distortions. So whenever you're feeding yourself with should statements, you're sort of feeding yourself with anxiety to a degree. But whenever we ask those preference-based questions, we often get back, well, I don't know, what do you want to do? Or it depends, right? Nick's famous for saying it depends, because it depends on what you want. So this is a high-level kind of image of the path. I see Chantel just put a Scrooge McDuck up, so that made me happy. Step one is getting inventory of our core priorities. So from my experience, we all come preloaded with 3 things that we want, no matter what. We want some amount of money in the bank for reserves, probably want to pay off some debt, and we have some money for retirement. Now, the amount we need for retirement, the amount of debt that we have, the amount of reserves, that's what's going to vary based off you as individuals. But we all have these sort of core set of priorities that need to be identified. Then we move to our personal set of preferences. Back to my example of some folks want a vacation home. Some folks, like, I want to be able to pay for my kids to go to college, and got 2 daughters, so I want to be able to pay for their weddings. Hopefully modest weddings, but I want to be able to pay for them. Those are personal preferences. So so we've got our core priorities, and then we need to add in what's unique, what's personal to you. The combination of the two is our definition of financial certainty, wealth. Does that make sense? Throw me a head nod or a thumbs up if that makes sense. So our core priorities, debt, reserves, retirement, plus our personal preferences, that combination is our definition of wealth. So we go through those steps, and then we have to then we are off to the races. Can we achieve this? And this is where a lot of uncertainty creeps in, insofar as it's a bit of a multivariable equation. So a lot of folks haven't set deadlines for when they want to achieve their priorities, or they haven't assigned a dollar value to those priorities. And if you haven't set a deadline, or if you haven't set dollar values to each of your priorities, then you can't solve the equation for how much more you need to make each year. Does that make sense? If you don't know how much each priority costs, and you don't know when you want to achieve it by, then you can't solve for how much money you need to make each year, because it's a multivariable equation. How much do I need to make? Well, I don't know. Depends on what you're trying to fund and when you want to fund it by. So once we go off to the races, we have to figure out, are our priorities achievable based off the timelines and deadlines that we've set? This is the biggest problem that I see in entrepreneurship, is that is the danger of more. And part of the reason why we had Dr. Jeff on is that he talked about, in various ways, about the importance of taking a pause and not burning ourselves out. He didn't use those words, but not crushing yourself, I think is what he said. But our assumption in business is always that we need more. We need more revenue, we need more profits, we need more cash flow. But we've never often spent the time to figure out how much more we need to fund our priorities. So we need to be able to figure that out based off how much we're making now, is it achievable? If not, and our current assets, if not, how much more do we need to make to be able to fund those? So we can solve that. That's what the Certainty app currently does. And I can share some of the behind this. I can share some of the updates in a few moments. But it helps you define those priorities, define those dollar values, bring in your bank accounts and assets, and determine, can you actually fund everything based off the timelines that you've set? If you can't, then you need to consider refactoring your objectives, meaning maybe you need to change the timelines to make it more realistic or achievable. Maybe funding your retirement in 3 years is not actually achievable. Maybe what's 5 years? What's 10 years look like? Does that now become achievable without needing to make more? So we can refactor and adjust those things to recalculate, basically. But we want to do that after we've done some re-optimization. We've looked at, can we keep more of the money that we're already making by paying less in tax, by re-engineering our cash flow? When you have a conversation with a client and they say they can't afford you, that's usually a priority statement, right? If you have a business that's making $1 million and they say, I can't afford your $10,000 service, they have $1 million a year in revenue. It's not a priority to them, right? There's a way they're prioritizing other things over the work that you're doing. And so we need to help our clients, help ourselves to re-engineer our cash flow and think about, are the expenses we're already paying getting us closer to the things that we want? So as you guys know, we have a whole methodology for doing the cash flow re-engineering, and you should be doing that quarterly. But we're going to look at, can we keep more of what we already have? And yes or no? And do we need to refactor our objectives to get there? And then once we've done that, then we're off to the races to figure out and sort of continue on the path to get closer to the things that we want. But as life events occur, that sends us back to step one. So if you go from single to married, probably got to go back to step one and go, okay, how much reserves do we really need? Does the person I just married have some debt that we need to pay off? Where are they at with their retirement? All the numbers have sort of changed. If we start a business, if we have kids, those life events or major milestones in our business need to cause us to kind of go back to step one and go, okay, do we really have an appropriate amount of reserves, debt? How much debt do we need to pay off? Retirement? Are there any changes to our personal preferences? And we need to basically recalculate. And so we're on this path where the reality is we have to keep going back to step one to see what's changed. Does that make sense to everyone? So part of what we're doing on a quarterly basis with these Seeking Certainty Summits is going back to step one and going, has anything changed with our core priorities? Has anything changed to our personal preferences? Parkinson's law, as you make more, you find new things that you want, right? So it just happens. And I've got lots of personal stories of things that I've added, over the years, niceties. Okay, now I don't want to deal with the lawn anymore. Now, you know what? I'd like to have meals prepared. There's niceties that you add, or you get complacent. It's easy when you're running a business and everything. It's like going to Costco. You can't spend less than $100 at Costco. I think that's mandated as part of your membership. As soon as you walk in, you're going to spend at least $100. It's kind of like that in business. You just get used to like everything costs $1,000 or more. And so we almost get, Kyle Bogey said $400 for Costco. Yeah, that may be true. In business, it seems like everything costs at least $1,000, and then eventually everything seems to cost at least $2,000 and then $10,000. And what ends up happening is that you're used to everything costing $10,000, and then your wife texts you and they're like, hey, I just found this $1,500 purse. What do you think? It's like, Well, that's less than 10,000. That seems pretty cheap. Sure, why not? Projecting. But you just get reoriented to these different milestones, these different expense levels, and the sort of calibration gets off. What used to seem expensive is now cheap because you're on a relative basis. So we kind of have to keep going back and going, what do we add? How do we adjust our base? How do we reset our baseline so we don't just keep adding more and more and more, again, Parkinson's law. So that's the ultimate path to certainty. The tools that we're using to get there, to process these issues, are the wealth principles. It's those 10 core principles that we talk about, like first we optimize, then we maximize. We bias T-learning over I-learning. And all of the other sort of the 4 lenses, so on and so forth. Those are the tools that we're using along the path to make sure that we remain in the championship mindset, to steal the phrase from Jeff Spencer. So that is the path at a high level. Now, I'm going to stop the share for a moment and switch over and pull up Certainty app for a moment. Kind of give you guys a little bit of a look at it.
Nick, bonus points to Chantal real quick for having a Scrooge McDuck background.
Yeah. Yeah, gold star for sure. Kyle doesn't have his screen on, but he did change his image to be Scrooge McDuck. So that also counts. So anyhow, message to everyone else with their screens off. Nick, what do you say?
Looking at the dashboard.
Dashboard. Okay. So over the coming days and weeks, there's going to be more that shows up on the dashboard as we add in all the business tools. But this is just sort of a brief example, dashboard view of what priorities have been loaded in for this fictitious person. So we've got pay off student debt, kids' college, buy another rental property. Right now, fortunately for this unfortunate soul, they've not met any percent. 0% has been met for those priorities. And you can look down here and see in more detail that for them to pay off student debt, they'd have to pay down a liability of $90,495, and so on and so forth, the specific details. So this is the dashboard view, but ultimately what we're going to do is we need to define our priorities. So you go under priorities, active priorities, and you can click to add another priority, or if you want to edit an existing priority, you can do that and just click in here and drill down. And so what we see is we've given a name for it, but also we can select from various categories that this will fall under, because it's going to help you with your kind of reporting and data analysis going forward. So some future tools that are going to come out are going to be able to show you that based off your priorities and other information you've set up regarding your account, how do you compare to other people like you in terms of the amount of debt, amount of assets that you have, the progress that you're making, so that you have a sense of benchmarking, understand how you're doing. So this is a specific example, how much is needed, by what date, how often are you going to revisit this priority? So the reality is that priorities can change or need to be looked at over time. For example, the pay for kids' college, you might want to look at that quarterly or annually, because the number might change, the amount that you're expecting to pay for college. And so this is going to help with your reporting and dashboard view of what priorities you need to go in and examine. Because this is a demo view and we're finishing the configuration, it's got this weird characters here, but basically in your setup in the app, you're going to sync in all your liability accounts, all of your asset accounts through Plaid. So Plaid is just the backend technology that allows you to get real-time balances of all your accounts. And so this specific account or the liabilities that were selected totaled up to this amount. And then you can assign the bank accounts or other assets that you're going to use to be able to pay off or fund those priorities. So, and then we can come in here and look at any completed priorities. If we have any, we can connect additional accounts, and we can map our cash flows, income, and expenses. And so what this does right now is take our Excel spreadsheet that many of you have used up to this point. So if you've seen the profit priority methodology, Nick, can you see the Google
Yep.
Doc?
Yes, sir.
If you've seen the previous version, the original version of sort of profit priority methodology, this is sort of the next evolution. So we go in here, we define our priorities, when we want to achieve them by. We put in our assets and liabilities and cash flow, and then we assign all those assets so that we can arrive at the number. How much more do we need to make to be able to fund everything? And so the current version of the app, as it's rolling out with the new technology stack and the user interface, allows you to actually connect your real bank accounts so that you get live balances and more details about interest rates and all that sort of stuff. Get live balances in terms of your liabilities, and be able to track the progress faster. So there's one of two things that you should be doing if you're on the path to financial certainty. Either going into the spreadsheet or going into the app and updating it. So I think everyone has access to the spreadsheet, and I'm going to share with you the Seeking Certainty workbook in here in a second. I'll share the link in the comments. And so you all have access to the spreadsheet to manually update it. In the next coming days, you'll get the login that you've been using for the old user interface should still work as we move over to an entirely new tech stack. And I would strongly urge that you go in there and you update your priorities within the app, and you sync in all your bank accounts, because it's going to do a ton of heavy lifting for you in the future, as we've got a ton of additional features that are going to keep rolling out every 3 weeks or so once we get this major overhaul kind of out there. Nick, what do you want to add or clarify?
I got nothing there. That was pretty straightforward. I think it's the two things. I guess the two things are the updating. I don't know if anybody's updated their workbook or the original version of the app. Get in the habit of that. Again, we have worst case every 90 days as kind of a forcing function to get together and do that. But the risk is obviously that it just doesn't, we don't consistently update what actually matters to us, and we stay on the wrong path.
100%. Yeah, if every action needs to get us closer to the things that we actually want, then we have to make sure that we're absolutely crystal clear on those priorities. Otherwise, the danger is that, back to your point about how we have to look up every once in a while. We could get everything done off of our list and still call the day a failure because we didn't look up and reassess and realize that we're no longer working on our number one priority. We're actually working on our number 10 priority. And so we've got to keep looking up, at least quarterly, updating, seeing where we're at. If you go into the Certainty app and actually sync your bank accounts, it's going to update your progress for you real time. So most of the heavy lifting will be done there. It's just a matter of making sure that the milestones are correct, meaning the dates that you want to achieve the milestone by, as well as the amount that you need to fund that priority.
I think one of the most helpful things, I'm just going to throw this in here real quick, because Dan and I are always, if you've been on our Wednesday calls, then you've heard us say a version of this. Sometimes there's an aversion. There's always an aversion to setting the priorities, because when you define success, you've also defined failure, right? So there's that. But there's also the fact that one of the most useful, it's not a technical or a mechanical thing. It's very much a mental thing, is that when we're doing this and when we're if you're having me help you or Dan help you, or you're doing this with your business partner or your spouse, it's really important that it is understood that there's no position being taken. There's no judgment. The reality, this is it's just a mental, psychological thing. The reality is one of the biggest hangups is that for some reason we think we're going to be judged for our priorities, or that our priorities have changed. And I just want to point out how important it is that we're honest, at least with ourselves, and we understand no judgment. Your priorities are your priorities. Because if you can't have that conversation and you can't really define what actually really matters, there's not a roadmap in the world that can get you there. So just point that out, because when Dan mentioned, you look up, sometimes we have told the world what matters to us, or we've told a bunch of people, and now if our priorities really have changed, we have to deal with that inconsistency. And there's a bunch of biases Dan talks about, like the consistency bias, that's going to try to, our human mind will push back, our human mindset will push back to try to be consistent with what we said before. When the reality is that may just not be accurate anymore. So I want to point that out as part of the process of looking up and realizing, like, yeah, I know maybe I told everybody I was going this way, but that's just not what I want. And we have to be okay with that, and recognize that as soon as possible. Again, maybe it's a summit, maybe it's a Wednesday call, maybe you do it on your own. I want to throw that in there as just something to keep in mind.
I think many of us know that when we start a business, or we are going to be actively involved in entrepreneurship, that to a large degree we've started the hero's journey. You guys familiar with the concept of the hero's journey? So you've been called to go on an adventure, and part of that adventure is that to a degree you have to go through this death and rebirth of sorts, this revelation that leads to a transformation, and then an atonement, and then ultimately return. So that's the hero's journey. And a lot of that hero's journey is sort of in the abyss. The abyss phase is realizing that you have to kind of let go of the past, right? That there's to truly be on the hero's journey, you have to let go of the things that are holding you back. And a lot of that are all the should statements, all the things that you're told you have to do to be a productive member of society, all the things that you have to do to run a business. I went to business school, went to a Jesuit university. We heard about all these things we have to do to be part of a just and humane world. And I believe a lot of that is true, but there's not one way to do business. There's not one way to live your life the right way. The right way is relative to your own journey. So we know we're on this journey. Intuitively, we all know that. Yet we still so often get stuck with what other people were telling us that we were supposed to do. So oftentimes I look at people's priorities and they're not their own priorities. They're somebody else's that they were told they had to have. And so there's no right or wrong. And if you're going to go on this journey and have to go through this rebirth and this transformation, why not make sure that you come out the other end with the things that you actually want, not somebody else's. So to me, that's the point. If you're going to be on this journey, you're going to take these risks. You're going to have to forsake your past. You're going to have a bunch of people who doubt you. At the end of it all, when you return from this journey, why not return being the person and having the things that you wanted? So that's sort of the point. Nick, anything you want to add before I introduce the next thing?
Nope.
Any questions that people have?
Yeah, any questions, you can unmute yourself or you can drop them in the chat. You should have the ability to just unmute your mic.
Cool.
And again, Wednesdays, every Wednesday, any time. This is a place where everybody kind of understands the frameworks and stuff. Anytime you just need to have a dialogue. I'm aware, back to a version of the hero's journey. So I'll add this while Dan gets his screen ready. The reality is, you see all the Facebook ads. I mean, I'm always hitting this stuff hard: the survivorship bias, the Facebooks, the fake life, the big promises. The reality is, the hero's journey. If you really do want to pursue the things that matter to you, it can feel you can feel isolated. I think we've probably talked about this at length on other calls. Is you can feel very, very lonely, and sometimes it is just worth having a person or two or five that totally gets it, somebody else on their own journey, and just have a dialogue. I find there's very few people that can have that. Like a lot of your friends, a lot of your family, a lot of the people you went to school with, they probably have jobs. They probably don't fully understand this whole journey you're on. It can be very valuable to sit on some of the stuff, the would, should, or the shoulds, or the priorities you think you're supposed to have. Just bring them to something like a Wednesday call, or, if you have another mastermind, a group of people, or a person that gets it. Oftentimes it won't be your spouse because they're just not on their entrepreneurial journey, and have a dialogue. So I can't stress how important it is to just have an outlet with some sort of cadence, monthly, weekly, quarterly, whatever. Because these are not conversations you can have with regular people. We're here every Wednesday. So.
All right. So once a quarter, we got to go back to our priorities, and we need to make sure that they're defined correctly. All right. So I shared the link to this workbook, sort of our quarterly Seeking Certainty workbook, and you guys can all go in there and do a save as, and you can update the profit priority piece, or I'd urge you to go into the app and start utilizing that. Right now, everyone that buys gets grandfathered into all the features that are coming. So do one of the two, but ultimately you need to know the path that you're on. Otherwise, you're never going to get there, right? You got to know the final destination. So that's step one. On a quarterly basis, we need to do that, or whenever there's a life event. So unfortunately, life is not so simple that we can just wait until the end of the quarter. So if you have a major life event, then we need to go back to step one and reevaluate. So at least once a quarter, or whenever there's a life event, go back to the profit priorities, make sure that the actions are getting you closer. Now we move into, how do we create our action plan? How do we figure out the things that we should work on for the next quarter that are going to move the needle for our business? And we've got tools to help evaluate that. One of them that I apply for businesses that I'm involved in operating. So there are actual investments, things that you're passive in, like stocks and bonds. You're passive investor. You don't really have control over the performance of the stocks and bonds. Or you could have invested in a company, but you don't have any real say in the day-to-day operations, or you're just like a board member of sorts. And so you're not involved in the day-to-day. So you're more passive there. Most of us are running companies. And so we're in it. We're in the day-to-day scrum of it all, triaging whatever problems come up, and trying to move the ball forward. And so we use this tool to try to figure out the issues or things that we should focus on, and we call it the investor frame. And the first thing you need to do is estimate, what do you think your business is worth? So what do you think your business is worth? If you were to sell it, how much do you think you could get? 100 grand, 200 grand, 500 grand, doesn't matter. What is your business worth? Okay. So what is the business worth? And then the question would be, so let's just say that we put in a number that the business is worth $1 million. Or Nick, for our fictitious example, how much do you want to mastery mode. How much do you want to say mastery mode is worth?
37,400,000.
So then the next, now that we have this number, $37,400,000, 37.
$400,076.
Okay. So if you had that in cash, would you buy mastery mode? If you had $37,400,076, whatever cents, if you had that in cash, would you buy that business? So for each of you, whatever number you put down, what is your business worth? If you had that in cash right now, would you actually buy the business? Matita.
As it is, right?
You don't have to, as it is right now, Matita, you don't have to tell me what you think your business is worth, but if you had that in cash right now, would you buy the business with that cash? Yes. Okay. Nothing you'd want to change, just happily buy.
I want to stabilize it. So if it's stable, I think I will, yeah.
Cool. Matita's always a good sport, so I'm not trying to pick on her. I just knew that she would happily respond. So the initial exercise, just to sort of ground us, is what do we think our business is worth? Would we buy it? Because now we need to dig into why or why not we wouldn't buy this business. So conceptually, I think we can take our business, this is a thought experiment. Conceptually, we can divide our business into 4 categories. Okay, I'm going to share a workbook with you guys in a few minutes, but conceptually, we can divide our business into 4 categories. Money, operations, so the doing of the work, human capital, like your staff, HR, and lifestyle, meaning its impact on you. Does that make sense? Money, operations, human capital, lifestyle. Now, at any given time, well, let me ask you a question, Nick. For you, money, operations, human capital, lifestyle, are those all equally important to you?
Nope.
No. And so there's some relative priority, right? One is more important than another, and there's some sequence, right? Is that allocation for you the same? So mastery mode, you've been running it for 3 years, 4 years?
Almost 3 years, yeah.
So 3 years, mastery mode. Today, when you think about money, operations, human capital, and lifestyle, and how you'd rank order them in terms of importance, is that rank ordering the same today as it was 3 years ago when you started?
Not even close.
Was it the same 90 or 120 days?
I'll tell you this. When did I move to Seattle? 2 months? Month and a half?
Right before the Seahawks season started, so it's 6 weeks ago.
Just the small changes in my priorities from living somewhere else have changed how I rank order the priorities inside of what mastery mode needs to do for me for it to make sense.
Yep. So there is a relative priority between money, operations, human capital, and lifestyle, right? We can rank order them in importance. They're not sometimes they might be of equal importance, but usually they're not, right? Sometimes we really need to get some money in the door. Sometimes we need to take some time off, right? We're burnt out. Sometimes we really need to hire some people. Sometimes we can't afford to. Sometimes we need to fix our operations to make the processes better. Right? And so there's a relative priority, and it changes over time. Does that make sense to everyone? Anyone disagree with that? It's okay to disagree with me. I actually enjoy it when people do. But don't tell my wife that. I don't enjoy it when she does. But somewhat joking. So there's a relative priority, and it changes. So what do we do with that? How do we analyze it? So naturally, what do I do in these situations? And when I can't figure this out, or I know that something is a bit multivariable. Of course, I build a spreadsheet. Why would you not build a spreadsheet to figure this out? Which is what I did. And so the obvious solution to a problem is to build a spreadsheet, being somewhat facetious. So here we go. We've got money, operations, human capital, lifestyle, right? It's got to add up to 100%. So we need to allocate that 100% based off importance. So right now for you, getting some money in the door, that could be the only thing that matters. Could be the only thing that matters. Is that, Dylan, is that right or wrong? Dylan's
Accurate.
Yeah, it's all relative to that specific person. So completely fine and appropriate if right now the only thing that's important to you is money. Totally fine. Alternatively, the only thing that could matter would be lifestyle. Also fine. So, and so step one is for us to allocate between these buckets, our relative importance. Because the danger is that we spend a bunch of time addressing problems. So I could come up with a million, say money is my number one thing. Everything else is 0. And so really I need to get some clients in the door. I need to raise prices, but instead what I'm doing is just spending a lot of time fixing processes. It does not have it's a long game. Fixing those processes are going to pay off in 6 months, 9 months. But if I need money right now and I'm spending my time fixing things that are process related, guess what? I'm getting further away from the things that I need. Does that make sense? Right. Oftentimes, this is what we do. We call it watering the weeds. We're doing things that are getting us further away from the things that we actually want. And for us to actually be able to build our action plan, which is what the ultimate outcome from today should be, we need to understand what's most important, what's the most immediate needs for us, where's our relative priority lie, right? So what we're going to do is put in our allocations. Once we have the allocations, then we're going to look at each of these areas and do an assessment of what might be broken. Okay. Now, if this is truly 100% money and everything else is 0, I'm not going to spend time evaluating these other areas because it's getting me further away. Or if something is less than 10%, not going to spend time on evaluating that because again, it's getting me further away. And by evaluating it, I might end up on a wild goose chase or watering the weeds because I might identify something that's really painful that I could solve right now. And so I have the tendency to want to fix something that's easy. It's low hanging fruit. Why don't I just take care of it? It's only going to take me an hour. Well, on a relative priority basis, it's not the thing that you ultimately care about. So that hour may solve a problem, but it's not your highest priority. It's exactly what Dr. Jeff talked about earlier about how the lead dominoes, solving those top 1 or 2 things, we call it optimize rather than maximize, solving that top 1 or 2 things are going to probably solve most of your downstream problems. So does that make sense? So we're going to allocate, and then we're going to go through these different frameworks and try to identify the friction points. Okay. So we got these columns down here. Now I stole this because I'm a nerd, my team, from something called the COSO framework. So if you're familiar with Sarbanes-Oxley, hopefully you're not, but if you are, Sarbanes-Oxley, for any publicly traded company, they have to comply with this act in the US and basically sign off that they have good internal controls. This goes back to all these accounting frauds from 2002. So there's this thing, the COSO framework, that's used to try to evaluate a business to determine if it has a proper control framework. So I modified the COSO framework and applied it to this investor frame. this is T-learning versus I-learning. I-learning is just getting super, super domain focused. T-learning is going, what are things I already know about, spent a lot of time on, unfortunately, in a previous life. I'm still recovering from these wounds. I was an auditor. So previous life as an auditor, I had to do a bunch of Sarbanes-Oxley internal control work. It was a dark period of my life. I'm glad to be past it. But I can still use that knowledge skill to try to solve a different problem. So I'm just using this example to share how stealing from, borrowing, leveraging something you already know, and then applying it to a different, slightly different concept. So we've got these different frameworks, company environment, policies, procedures, communication, monitoring. And so when we talk about company environment, specifically, it represents the following. I don't know if you guys, can you see it okay, Nick?
Yes. Real quick,
Oh.
can I dive in for a second?
Yep.
One of the things, I think everybody's heard this before, but I've shared the investor frame and had Dan talk about it at the super high-end private client events. And it seems like a lot to have these might be conversations we don't really want to have, because it's so easy. It's like a bad relationship. It's just so easy to stay in it, even though you would never choose to be in it again, knowing what you know now. And it's the same thing with our business. Dan talks about rental properties all the time. The main reason this is 100% worth going through and so important is if it's something we wouldn't opt back into. So if you say, yeah, I totally wouldn't buy my business, knowing what I know now, and I would not pay $10 million to opt into the life that I have right now. Then by staying in it, you're violating your personal economic principles. I just want to hopefully poke at that a little bit and cause enough pain or concern to understand that it is so easy to stay in a bad situation. And when you zoom out and say, no, I would never choose to do this if it's going to stay this way, is really important. And we have to recognize that we're staying in it is again, stealing Dan's language, staying in it is the same as opting into it, right? So we need to be aware when we are violating our economic principles, our personal principles, and choosing to stay in a situation we would never opt into. And that this is how we recognize that. And then what Dan's sharing here and why it's worth the time and effort is it's an attempt to, right? The question is, would I opt in? And the answer is no. Well, then the next question, I think, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, we're sorting through right here is, well, how do we make it a situation I would opt into?
That's right.
So that I'm no longer clearly violating my own personal preferences, priorities, and principles.
Yeah, the assumption when we go down here to apply the frameworks is that the problem is solvable. So if the problem is something industry specific, so I think I see Chantel here, you work with dogs, right? I make that up. So if you were like, the reason why I wouldn't buy this business is because it deals with dogs, that's not a solvable problem because the business is dog training, right? I would never buy this business, the CPA firm, because it has tax deadlines. Well, if it's a tax business, I probably need to move on. So there are things that are not, you just can't possibly change it because it's so inherent in what the business does. Assuming, so if you said, I would never buy this business because it does accounting and you own an accounting firm, then the next step would be to figure out how to sell it because that is something you cannot change. If it is a business decision or something you're doing, you're causing, then that is something that can change. So assuming that we can implement change, we move down to actually evaluating these frameworks. I call it identifying the friction points in your business. And so we've got these frameworks: company environment, policies, procedures, communication, monitoring. And so company environment has to do with integrity and ethical values. So are we being basically consistent with our values? If you haven't defined them, if you're not clear on your company values, mission statement, vision, etc., then you just get to give yourself a 0 for all these if you haven't defined that stuff, because it's not possible for you to demonstrate a commitment and integrity and ethical values if you've never defined them, right? So we go, are we demonstrating a commitment to that? Have we established clear structure, authority, and responsibility? Are we demonstrating a commitment to competency, and are we enforcing accountability? That's the company environment framework. So what I do is I go money. All right, that's the finance, operations, tax part of my business. Within the confines of that part of my business, are we acting in accordance with our company values, demonstrating integrity? Do we have clear structure, authority, and responsibility? Do people know what they're responsible for? Do we have the right segregation of duties? Are we doing competent work, meaning the work that is produced, so when I get the financial statements, are they good? Or are they delayed and there's a bunch of issues? And is there clear accountability? So if the taxes are not paid on time, as or bills are paid late, or things arrive late, are people being held accountable to that? We apply that. So then we can apply that same framework to operations and go, are operations acting consistent with our values? We say one of our values is excellence, but we keep having clients refund because they don't think we're doing good work. So we're not being consistent with our values. We keep having these issues where people don't know what they're responsible for. There's not clarity around that. So that's not established. We don't have the right structure, authority, responsibility in place. There's a lot of rework to be done. That means that we don't have a commitment to competence, and then potentially there's no accountability. So you apply each of those, you apply the company environment to each of these categories, assuming that it has a greater than 10%. Or assuming you have some allocation there. Again, if all of your allocation is going to money, then you don't need to spend time evaluating operations, human capital, lifestyle, etc., because it's just going to be a distraction. It's going to be a water in the weeds. Nick, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, that makes sense to me.
So say I go through this money and I say, okay, demonstrates integrity. Do I feel like we're acting consistent with our values and our finance, accounting, operations? And I go through that and I give myself a score out of 100. Right? So you can come up with your own way of scoring that, or it can be subjective, gut feel, initial reaction, however scientific you want to be, and you might say 75%. Okay, and then we're going to evaluate each of these buckets through the lens of policies, procedures. Now, when you get down here to lifestyle, you may not have any policies and procedures, so you can leave that blank. Right? But as it relates to lifestyle, you probably do have some definition of your own personal values. Are you sort of keeping yourself accountable, all those sort of things. So may not have a policy and procedure component to your lifestyle, although if you're a health nut, for example, maybe you do. Maybe you have a consistent, I want to record all of my meals. I want to keep track of my sleep, all those sort of things. So you could have it, but it may not, policies and procedures may not apply to lifestyle. So we go through each one of those and we give an assessment. Communication is the proper information being generated and to support the function. So are we getting financial information? Is it digestible? I would always ask the question, applying the BIRD principle, do I get business insights that's relevant and digestible? So I may be getting reports about about the finances, about the operations, about the human capital side of things. But but they just may not be relevant, or because they come too late, or they're not digestible, or they're just not insightful to me. In the lifestyle frame, I'd evaluate how I'm communicating with my spouse and friends. Am I getting back to people timely? Am I following through on being transparent? And then monitoring has to do with, are we doing any ongoing evaluations and communicating anything that's not working, any deficiencies? And so the process, to summarize, is we do the allocation, and then we go through and we give ourselves an assessment, right? 20%. We're not doing any monitoring. So 5%. And this gives ourselves a score. Now, if we have a different allocation, we'd fill out the other rows and it'd give us the ultimate final score. And the point of this is to give us a snapshot, a more algorithmic approach to how we're really doing as a business, but also to help us hone in on the things that we should address and fix. So I'm going to